Hello and welcome to our next NAP. NAP stands for Nonprofit Auditor Points, and I'm Irina Ryshkova, your nonprofit auditor. And today I want to talk about payroll. As an auditor for small nonprofit organizations, I see it all the time that payroll, one of the largest expenses, are not properly documenting and does not have sufficient procedures around the payroll. What your small nonprofit can do in order to ensure that you protect your nonprofit from potential legal issues and also properly record and account for payroll. Let's talk about it. First of all, payroll related to employees, and it's governed by Department of Labor, IRS, a lot of many other state and federal agencies. Therefore, your nonprofit, regardless of the size, but even if you have a tiny nonprofit organization with 1 or 2 employees, you need to make sure that this is one area where your nonprofit has a robust system of controls. Again, to have a good control around payroll does not mean that you need to spend an hours to set it up. It can be simple procedures, but they need to be documented and followed. What do I mean by that? I mean that first of all, every employee that your nonprofit has needs to have a hiring letter. If your nonprofit hired employees without one, create one right now. Make it official. Make sure that you document understanding, pay rate, and the position that employee is hired. Even if you are the one who created nonprofit, was on the board and later become an employee, maybe executive director, everyone without exceptions should have a hiring letter. Then every employee has to have related hiring package documents like I-9, W-4, withholding forms, and so forth. These forms needs to be signed by an employee and by the management or the board member. Both sides needs to sign. These documents are legal in nature and needs to be maintained by nonprofit. Why? This gives a protection to nonprofit organization and an employee to make sure there's clear understanding of the relationship between an employee and employer. Also, it is very critical from accounting standpoint. Now, typically, annually or from periodically, nonprofit will have payroll adjustments. Maybe employee will be promoted from one position to another position, and employee will have increase in benefits or change in benefits and change in the compensation. If that happens, this needs to be documented. It can be documented in a simple memo format. Again, that needs to be signed by both sides, by the organization, representative of the organization, and an employee. Only then these documents become legal binding. Why? Again, that provides, first of all, necessary proper documentation and also protects nonprofit and employee from the potential misunderstanding, mistakes, errors, and fraud. Every rate change needs to be documented. So if it happens periodically, every time, the procedure needs to be the same. Needs to be documented, could be memo format, and signed by both representatives from the employee side and employer side. It has to have effective date, it has to have old rate, new rate, and reason for change. The reason could be simple market adjustment, could be promotion, could be whatever reason. But as long as it's documented, signed, and understood, it's enough, sufficient documentation. Also, that's really critical for accounting department to have, and by department, I do not mean that needs to be the full department. The person who process payroll, if your nonprofit use outside payroll company or somebody internal, that document needs to be provided so that person can update rates in a payroll report. Also, the new pay rate needs to be used by bookkeeper to calculate accrued vacation, unpaid vacation. The unpaid accrual vacation always have to be calculated by using the most recent rate. To have a proper documentation of pay rate and a date will not only ensure proper accounting procedures and protect your nonprofit from any potential litigations, but also will decrease of possibility of misuse and dishonest behavior. So it will discourage any individual to take advantage of disorganization and potential miscommunication and possibility of the challenging nonprofit about the pay rate. Because if there is no documentation, it's going to be in word of nonprofit against the word of individual. And lastly, all this information memos needs to be retained in employee folder. Each employee folder needs to be maintained and be able to access only by limited amount of personnel. Typically it's your human resource. If you don't have a human resource, maybe designated board member who can access and check the pay rates of each employee. And additionally, if your nonprofit decides what pay rate to use for your executive management, it could be financial director, could be executive director, the communication and discussion within the board members about pay rate needs to be documented, and it has to be reasonable basis for the board conclusion what pay rate will be used for your executive director. That rate should not be just because. Typically, board members have to consider similar nonprofits and see what would be the reasonable compensation to your executive director. The board needs to vote on the pay rate of executive director, and it needs to be documented. Again, all this information about change in pay rate needs to be communicated to your accounting department, who will use these amounts to update payroll rates in a payroll process, but also calculate accrued vacation. And lastly, nonprofits needs to understand that their payroll tax forms, Form 941's quarterly payroll, is filed on a cash basis. Your payroll amounts in your accounting system is recorded on accrual method, meaning that in Form 941 and related state tax forms, payroll is reported as it paid, cash basis, meaning you paid, you report it. On accrual method of accounting, payroll recorded when it's earned. For example, if for December 31st, payroll paid on a January 3rd, it means that payroll period, let's just say 2 weeks before December 31st, was paid after year end. This 2 weeks period needs to be recorded as accrued payroll, meaning nonprofit owes that money to employee because the money were earned but were paid after year end. Therefore, every bookkeeper needs to perform payroll reconciliation of cash basis to accrual basis of the payroll to reconcile tax forms filed with the IRS Form 941s that on a cash basis to accrual accounting, which is amount reported on your financials. How to do that? You need to take Form 941, deduct prior year accrual, and add current year accrual amount and hopefully the amounts will reconcile. All of these procedures are necessary to be maintained and implemented by every nonprofit to ensure that one of your largest expense accounts, which is a payroll and related taxes and benefits, are properly counted in a proper period and there is no misuse and mistakes around the payroll. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and looking forward to see you next time.